In life of any spy, there is a moment when he understands the game is over.
I had this moment towards the end of 1985 when I noticed very strange things happening around my office. I was in a counterintelligence unit, so I was very sensitive to changes in procedures. My safe was left open with highly sensitive material in it. And when I brought this to the attention of my superiors, they didn't care about it. But I noticed other things happening around the office to other people as well. So when I came back to home, to Israel, in the summer of 1985, I told Rafi Eitan, my commanding officer, that I felt the walls were closing in and that I thought it was prudent for me to stay home in Israel. I was uncomfortable. I had done enough operations against other spies to know that things were not good around me. So he looked at me and he said, I'm going to tell you the same thing we told Eli Cohen when he came back for the last time from Damascus. I should say that my code name was Danny Cohen. And when I asked why I was given this code name, I was told by Rafi, this was in Paris, that, well, we had an Eli Cohen in Damascus, and now we have a Danny Cohen in Washington. And I said, that's bad karma. And he said, don't worry, we'll get you out. So I'm sitting there in the office with Rafi, and he said, let me explain why you have to go back. And what he explained to me was the fact that there was concern over a war breaking out between Syria and Israel over the Golan, and that the Syrians had what they call a standing start war plan, where they could just switch immediately into an offensive to get as much as they could before a ceasefire. And so he said, there are certain things that are coming out of Russia that will permit this war to happen, and we need to know if the material is coming to us in our area, to Syria, or to Libya. We don't know. They were coming out of, ships were going to be coming out of Nikolaev. So he said, you have to make a decision as to whether the country is more important than your life, the needs of the country. So I thought about it, not too long, and I said, okay, I'll go back. What am I looking for? And when I came back at one point towards the end, there was that moment. There were some Israelis in town visiting without diplomatic immunity. They were visiting me. And so I was very careful in what I did. And there was just a feeling I had. In this business, you have to live more by instinct than intellect sometimes. And I came in late at night, and I put a ladder next to my office, and I pushed the false ceiling up, and there it was. There was a camera right over my desk. And the alarm bells went off in my head, and my first instinct was to run.
So in any espionage saga or movie script, there is always an escape plan. And going over your case, I was asking myself, even after approached by the FBI agents and interrogated for the first time, you still were free to go and you still could go.
No.
Why did not
You-
you went straight away to the airport, to the Mexican border, to the Canadian border?
You have to.
I don't know, but
You
escape.
you have to understand that I knew what was happening because I'd been involved in other operations for the Navy, U.S. Navy, against spies. So I knew the drill, so to speak. I knew the procedures. My orders were that if I were arrested or held, it was likely that I would be released and watched. They wanted to see where I go, who I called. This was something that I did all the time with people we were going after. So I was told my orders were to buy time, and to admit that I was a Pakistani spy. And I had done things under orders to make sure I could pass a polygraph. And there were things in the house planted that would confirm my story.
So you have a plan in place.
We have a plan in place. There was no possibility of running. They had people right outside the door. They had people downstairs. They had people on the roof. They had people all around the apartment house. I told Rafi that where they put me was a death trap because there was no way for me to go anywhere without being seen. But he said, don't worry, we'll take care of everything. So I did confess to being a Pakistani spy, and I passed. And it really confused everybody. They didn't understand what was going on. And so after I did that, I had a phone, a safe phone, landline that I could use that they didn't find. And I called to tell my contact, it's done. I need to get out. And that's when he told me, Rafi never made an escape plan. You have to come to the embassy tomorrow. And I argued with this person that the whole point of the escape plan was to divert attention to somebody else. If I come to the embassy, it'll be a disaster.
It will be locked up in the embassy.
Yeah, I mean, it'll be ridiculous. He said, those are your orders.
Okay, so later on we go back, and guys, if you did not understand yet, we are sitting with Jonathan Pollard, one of the most famous, the greatest spies of 20th century, I think.
Infamous. I don't know, famous, infamous.
I would like to go back to the beginning of the story. And I was thinking what questions I would ask Jonathan. And one of the most interesting questions for me is the motivation. I know a lot of stories when people decided to switch side and to work against the Soviet Union. Because I also was born in the Soviet Union, and we felt that we live in the bad society, bad country, and people had strong feelings against the Soviet Union. So I understand they searched freedom, they decided to switch the side and to join the West in the fight for the freedom. But you were born in the, let's say, most
Texas.
best ever country in the world, United States of America. Why you decided to actually in some way to work against your country? Have you been loyal for the United States from the beginning?
The answer is yes, but I should explain that my indictment, what the government charged me with, was compromising national security information to a major non-NATO ally, in parenthesis Israel, without intent to harm the United States. This is something that a lot of people either don't know about or don't understand how important it is. And it's important, I think, initially to make this clear. I think you'll agree that there's some information that is so sensitive that if it's compromised to anybody, closest of friends, it could do unbelievable damage to national security. Code names, agent names, war plans, things like this, and other sensitive material. And if someone like myself had compromised that kind of information, I should have been indicted for intending to harm the country, because I should have known what I was doing would harm the country, but I wasn't. So this is my way of telling people, initially telling people, be careful what you believe the government is saying, because you have to look at the facts first, the legal facts, before you listen to the politicians and you listen to the intelligence people kind of recreate the story. I had always wanted to go home to Israel, always. And this was during Vietnam. And when I was in university. And my father was in the Army, my brother was in the Navy, I had uncles who were in the Army, said I owed a debt to the United States National Service, and that if drafted, I should go. And I didn't object to that because I thought whatever I learned, I could bring to Israel. The problem was the longer you live in a society, the more entrenched you become. And if you're part of the nomenclatura, if you're part of the establishment, which my family was and is, life is very comfortable. I went to a wonderful university, Stanford. I went on to MIT. I could have had a tremendous career, a happy and a successful career in the United States. But my heart was not there. There's some Jews who are destined, for one reason or another, to go home. And there are others who have to kind of be kicked, prodded, convinced to go home. And there are others that don't have a choice because the society they live in is so horrible, they have to leave, no matter what. I wasn't in that situation. But the problem is, my heart, as Yehuda Halevi said, was in the East. It was here in Israel.
You have been raised in the secular Jewish family. Would it be right to describe your childhood?
I would say it was a traditional Jewish family. I went to Cheder. I went to for young people, a young religious school after regular school. We were Shomer Shabbos. We had a glatt kosher home.
So you were connected to Judaism.
Absolutely. Well, we were a typical American family in the sense that we had a glatt kosher home, but we would go out and have shrimp cocktail. Or we would drive to a shul on Saturday and park the car along with everybody else around the corner and then walk. So it was a very schizophrenic type of upbringing. But there were a couple of things that were absolute values in our family. And one was Shomer Shabbos. The other one was to have a kosher home. The other one was to had to marry a Jewish girl. And I did 3 times. So, and the last thing that was actually very important was loyalty to Israel.
So it was at home.
This was at home. And you know, when you go to a shul, there's the American flag and the Israeli flag. So I grew up with both. Loyalty to the United States and loyalty to Israel. And my father didn't want me joining the American intelligence community because he said there will come a time when you have to make a choice. He said, I know what choice you're going to make, and I don't want you in that position.
Before we are going to this period in your life, I would like to stay a little bit on your childhood, on just going to the school and raising up in the United States. In a TV series made by Israel TV, they brought some people who knew you from your teenage years and the school years, and they claimed that you had no friends, you was quite alone. Could you tell about this teenage times? Was it the normal childhood, not normal childhood?
I know
meeting anti-Semitism in the United States.
I know the film, the reporter who did that film series, and I know that at the end there was hardly anybody watching it. I'll be quite frank with you. He lied. And at the time that this story came out, I think his name was Omri Assenheim.
True.
Yeah.
There's 4 episodes about your life.
Correct. My wife had just died, Esther, Alea Shalom. And many people called him and said, could you please delay the broadcast out of respect for Jonathan? He's sitting Shiva. And his answer was, no, now is the best time because I'll get great ratings. Let me just say that despite the fact that his conclusion was correct, that I was an ideologue, the stories that he told were, I didn't know who he was talking about. When I grew up, I traveled quite a bit with my mother and father overseas. We lived overseas in Europe and Asia, Australia. I grew up in a cosmopolitan environment. And my father being at the university, I met a lot of interesting people. I had to become grown up very quickly. I did have a lot of friends, good friends, because I was in music, I fenced, I ran track. I had a wonderful upbringing, except for the fact that for several years, I was exposed to horrible anti-Semitism.
In the United States?
In the United States, horrible anti-Semitism. I was fighting almost every day with the other boys. It wasn't 1-on-1, it was like 10-on-1 or 8-on-1, I was always just fighting against the odds. And it was very clear why, because I was Jewish. And my parents finally put me into a private school where there were a lot of kids from the university.
What years we are talking about?
My early years, up until the age of 10, 11. So it was a mixture of a wonderful environment, traveling around the world, living overseas, seeing different cultures, experiencing it, coming home to a musical culture that I was in, an athletic culture, fencing at the university with them, a wonderful home life, a very intellectually stimulating home life. But school was something to be feared. And when I started carrying a knife to school, my parents decided, die. It was enough, because I was really getting hurt. You know, when you have 10 guys beating you, and you don't surrender, you don't give up. I always just got one guy and hurt him enough where he didn't come back. But the other guys...
And we're still in the America in the period when Jews were not allowed to go to country clubs, had some restrictions. Or you did not feel that this
No,
way?
not for me, because again, I use this word because it best represents the culture I grew up in. It was the nomenclatura. My father was a member of the intelligence community. He was a university professor. He was a high-ranking military officer. He operated at the highest level of society. And I was part of that, as was my mother, my brother and sister. So we never felt excluded from anything. My father wasn't the type to join a country club. He had more important things to do. So my feelings, innate feelings for Israel, were reinforced by two things. Number one, an uncle from Germany. I lost, except for one, my entire German family. They woke up too late. He was on a voyage of the damned, and it was the United States that told the ship to leave. And he jumped ship off Trinidad. He lived, but the rest of them went back to Germany and died. And he told me over and over and over again, your loyalty exclusively is to the Jewish people, no matter what. And Israel is the only salvation we have on this earth. And I heard this over and over and over. It became part of my ideological perspective, I'll put it that way. The other important thing in my family was that two of my uncles, who were high-ranking Army officers, were responsible, one for the Irgun and the other one for the Haganah, were responsible for providing explosives and uniforms and weapons in the year leading up to 1948. And I knew about this. I mean, it was told at the dinner table and with pride. So my understanding of helping Israel was formed by these two ideological perspectives. There's no other place to be loyal to, and you have to do something tachlis. You have to actually do something. It's not verbally. You have to do something to save Israel, to save the third Jewish Commonwealth. So I was able, when I went to university, Stanford in California. You know, I told my father, now is the time I want to go home, and I want to do my national service and stay. And you know, a mother's tears can be very persuasive. And she begged me to stay, and my father begged me to stay long enough so that I could learn enough to be valuable when I came home. And logically, it was smart. They weren't trying to trick me. They were trying to help me make a mature decision. Go home with something tachlis to offer. If you want to be in the Navy or the Army, fine, but get some experience here first and go. It doesn't work that way, because the minute you become part of the system, it has a certain addictive quality to it. Being in the intelligence community especially, I mean, you're sitting on top of the world.
But that's for me was strange, actually. I was thinking there is a very talented Jewish boy attending Stanford University. After graduating from Stanford, you can choose whatever you want to do in the United States. You were in the position to join Wall Street, hedge funds.
Anything.
All doors are open, and you decide to try to chase military career, which is in the United States, usually for the people who cannot do anything else, you know. I don't know how to explain that, but let's say this is not the best.
It's not the typical
dream
road for Jewish
and especially
kids.
for good Jewish boy. Why? And you're trying to join CIA, and then you're joining Navy.
I came from a very patriotic family. My father was highly decorated from the Second World War. My uncles were highly decorated in the Second World War. So I grew up in a family where patriotism to the United States was something I just breathed in. It was a very strange environment because I was inculcated with the notion that Israel has to survive and you have to do whatever is necessary to protect Israel. And at the same time, the United States is the most wonderful country in the world for Jews, and we must do whatever is necessary to protect the United States. This is like loving two women. You can't. You have to prefer one over the other if it happens that you have to make a choice.
What you eventually did.
And I eventually did. And it was not that hard, because the terms of my operation specifically said that I should stay away from anything having to do with the United States. When I was in Paris on one occasion, Rafi told me to collect information that was not appropriate. He wanted the names of all the American spies in Israel. And everyone around the table was shaking their heads, like, no, you don't want to do this. And I just said to him, I'm sorry, I can't do that. And he said, okay, one of them is going to kill you. And I said, okay, one of them will kill me, that's fine, I can live with that. But I can't live with betraying an American agent. Well, guess what? One of them did kill me. He was a Russian guy who was in the Knesset Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee, a good friend of Arik Sharon, and a CIA spy. And this all came out in a court case in the United States because when he retired, he complained that his retirement was inadequate. And at any rate.
But let's go back to your student years. You're, as we said, graduating from the Stanford University. And what you want is to proceed with the military career. And your first move is to join CIA.
The CIA was going through a real change at the time. And one of the questions they asked me was whether I had smoked marijuana in college. And I said, yeah, I was in California in the early 70s, everybody did. And the guy that was interviewing with me laughed. I said, what's so funny? He said, I don't even know why I asked the question anymore. But the guys on top they've completely changed. And if you've gone anywhere near marijuana or anything like that, we can't take you. I said, so who are you getting? And he said, people we don't want. People who don't understand the world, people who haven't been around, people who haven't been part of society. Very naive people. Okay,
So you did not manage to pass the tests and you did not start to work for the CIA?
No, the test I passed. It was just that one issue.
With the drugs?
With marijuana. And they just said, the bosses now have said that they have zero tolerance for that. So eventually I was recruited out of graduate school by the Office of Naval Intelligence, ONI. I passed all the requirements for them, polygraph, everything. They didn't care about marijuana or anything else. The fact that I could speak other languages, that I traveled quite a bit, that I came from an exceptionally patriotic family, that's what they were interested in. And
so
that
you passed all the recruitment process. Could you please explain to the people, especially not from the United States, who will watch this episode, where exactly you served? Because the intelligence community in the United States is quite complicated. Where you served in the intelligence community?
In the intelligence community.
Yeah, what is this
naval intelligence? Naval intelligence, the Office of Naval Intelligence, is a very broad organization. Its mandate is very broad. There's a scientific and technical part, which I was part of for a while. There's an operational part, which is field work, spy work, which I did also. There's also a management side in the sense that you want to know where all enemy ships are in the world. Surface, subsurface, aircraft, whatever. And at the time, the principal enemy was the Soviet Union. The Chinese at the time didn't have really a high seas fleet, so everybody was mostly focused on the Soviet Union, the Soviet Navy, the escadron. And one of my entry questions, I had to write an essay on Admiral Gorshkov. He had a new book that just came out at the time. This was a long time ago, but it was the first book by a Soviet naval officer, high-ranking naval officer, about the Russian Navy, the Soviet Navy. So I read his book, and at the time it hadn't been published yet. I got a stolen copy, and I was amazed that this guy was amongst the most intelligent naval theorists history had ever seen, along with Alfred Thayer Mahan, along with Tirpitz, all of them. This was an important man, an intelligent man. And so I absorbed as much of his thinking as possible. So when I was asked to write an analysis of what he was saying, I wrote it as a Soviet naval officer. And that scared some people because they said, you're more Soviet than he is. And I said, no, you have to get into the mind of the enemy in order to understand what his intentions are. Why is he building these kinds of ships? Why are they different from ours? How does he intend to use them, etc.? So that was my introduction. The second introduction, I was asked, we had to have a blind selection, like picking a straw, to do an analysis. And I picked unfortunately, the Liberty incident in 1967. And I looked at all the information and came up with the conclusion that it was an accident. It was a genuine accident. Confusion over what the ship was and what it was doing. And when I gave this analysis, my commander at the time looked at me and he said, whose side are you on? And I just looked at him and I said, the truth. He said, no, I asked you a question. Whose side are you on? Jews or us? And that was the first time I suddenly realized it was the uh-oh moment. Oops, my father was right. And I said, I repeat myself, sir, the truth, wherever it goes. He said, we're going to keep an eye on you. Okay, I should have left at that point. But I couldn't. I was put on a committee as part of the U.S.-Israel Intelligence Exchange Agreement, and I sat with my Israeli counterparts and we exchanged intelligence, and I suddenly realized we weren't playing fair. The U.S. wasn't playing fair. We had basically instituted an undeclared intelligence embargo against Israel, and I was part of it. Why? The bombing of Tseitlin, the Iraqi nuclear reactor. And people like Admiral Bobby Ray Inman, who was the number 2 at the CIA, and Caspar Weinberger, who was the Secretary of Defense, swore blood revenge on Israel. We were causing our Arab allies problems.
Could you elaborate more about that? Because we are speaking about the Reagan administration. And he was someone from Republican Party, right-wing side even of the Republican Party. And naturally, he should support Israel, you know, it's like closest ally of the United States. What was the problem with his administration?
The problem, and this is why I was given the code name Danny Cohen, was because Washington was a very dangerous place at the time for pro-Israel bureaucrats or appointees. There were factions in Washington at the time, one very pro-Israel, and the other very pro-Arab. And at the time, there was the Iran-Iraq War, which meant we had to keep Saudi Arabia's security foremost in mind, which meant Iraq. We had to protect Iraq because they were fighting and dying against the Iranians, so that basically Saudi Arabia could be secure. That faction was vicious. And they set out to destroy, undermine, and in some cases, far worse, to any individual they considered a threat to their agenda. So I wasn't like working in the capital of a 100% ally of Israel. It was like a Byzantine setup where you had factions and interests that conflicted, that coalesced, that diverted, and you had to know where you were in that matrix in order to operate. And I could, because it wasn't just that being a spy, you learn how to lie convincingly. It was that I was actually part of that society. And my father and my uncles knew everybody, so I could operate with everybody. And I'd grown up in an international milieu, so I knew how to deal with different types of people. And which is one reason why the Navy hired me. I was what's called a Naval Intelligence Liaison Officer. What that meant was that I dealt with allied officers, naval officers, and again, exchanging information, quid pro quo with them. So because of that, I was trusted. I passed all my polygraphs, my drug tests, everything. A person in my position that dealt with foreign officers had to be watched very carefully. So I was drug tested, I was polygraphed, I was watched, and that was fine. I passed everything.
So while working for the naval intelligence, you understood that the American policy, in fact, jeopardizing Israel by not providing all the information,
That they were
hiding
obligated
information.
to, that they were legally obligated to under the terms of the intelligence exchange. Look, at one point, I was asked to investigate by the Israelis whether or not Iraq had built a huge poison gas facility. And I said, okay, what's the point of this? And they said, well, we have an official delegation coming to see the Secretary of Defense with a formal request for an answer. And we want to check. So on the day that the team came to see me, official team came to see me in the safe house, they sat at the table and told me point blank, we were assured that there is no such plant. I said, okay, come. And we went into a room, and there on the floor, the entire floor was covered with pictures of the largest poison gas plant in the world in Iraq. And one of my Israeli colleagues looked at me and said, Jonathan, you know, it's sometimes better to deal with reliable enemies than unreliable allies. And there it was, proof positive. That was just one of the many things that I can point to as an example of this fight within the administration over Israel policy. When I was sentenced, I had a lot of people, within the administration that tried to help me. People, if I told you who they were, you'd be amazed. They risked their reputations to help me. But there were two other things you must understand that sealed my fate. I saw, after 20 years, what's called the victim impact statement. Every defendant in a criminal case has an assessment of what he did, an objective assessment of what he did, presented to the court. And I understood why it took 20 years for me to see it. There was no damage. The only thing I had done that the US government felt was bad was that I had made certain Arab allies angry because they felt I had made Israel too strong. Alibi. But there were two other things that were happening at the time that sealed my fate. One of them was a Soviet spy.
Yeah, but one moment. Before that, I want to understand how all this began, all this espionage activity. So at some point, you decided that enough is enough and you should take any action.
I was on this committee.
Not the other side.
Correct. I was on the committee, and I saw what was happening. So I went all the way up the chain of command asking, Lama, why? And I didn't like the answers I was getting. And I suddenly realized this was a gross betrayal of Israel, my people, see? My people. I have family here. And when one of my colleagues, when I asked him, why aren't we giving certain types of information that we're supposed to, he said to me, let the Jews lose a few airplanes, they'll figure out the frequencies to jam. He's talking about my family. What, lose a couple of my cousins? Because you're refusing to give information that you're legally obligated to give Israel? You're refusing? And you come back to the office and you see an ashtray on your commanding officer's desk, an ashtray that said Auschwitz on it. And they think that's funny. I lost everybody except for one during the Churban Europa. And you think that's funny. Okay. And there were 100 other examples that I had to deal with of gross discrimination and gross racism against not just Israel, but Jews. People just didn't understand that I was Jewish. They didn't consider me Jewish. I never mentioned it. I never, when I'd go to lunch with everybody, I would eat lunch, but always vegetarian. They said, why don't you eat pork? What's the matter? This bacon's great. I'm a vegetarian. Okay. I already knew to hide my Jewishness at that point. Because the environment was so grossly anti-Semitic that I just said, another reason that, my father was right.
So at some point you decided to contact the Israeli official, let's say this way, or ex-pilot?
I knew people.
Avinoam Sela?
Yeah, he was the first contact that I had. A great man, a genuine Gibor Yisrael. And that's how it started.
So what you
and
told
at one point, I realized I was so far over the line that I had to make a decision. So I became an Israeli citizen. I became a bona fide Israeli agent. And it was understood that at the end of my operation, I would either come home here or go to Europe and continue operating there in some other capacity. And I felt, on the one hand, relieved that this split personality I had, this dual loyalty, if you will, was resolved to a point. And on the other hand, I was very scared because it's, at that time, everybody was looking for Soviet spies. And I was part of that. So, here I am. But this leads me to this, one of the two issues that led to my capture. Yeah. Well, my sentence.
You had a top security clearance, right, at the work?
I had everything all the way up at the top.
I have some interesting questions about how it seems like it's very easy to penetrate American intelligence and to take huge, I think you are maybe one of the largest leaks from the American intelligence. Yeah, you filled suitcases with the top secret documents.
It was...
how you could access all this information without anyone noticing why you are taking so much?
First of all, the amount of information I obtained was exaggerated. This happens in a case. When you don't have enough information on somebody, here's how it happens. You take one document And the document has 10 footnotes. So that's 11 documents then. Then they look at all the documents that are referenced, and oh, there are 100 pages here, 200 pages. So that's added. So suddenly, instead of 1 page or 2 pages that are compromised, it's tens of thousands of pages. My lawyers pointed out very clearly that I was restricted to one little suitcase. It was a business type valise that I had. And they pointed to this picture of a building that the government was claiming I had compromised, that the volume. And they asked the judge, I mean, this is what he had 11 times. That's it, just that. The judge looked at the government and said, could you explain that? And the answer was, well, it's self-evident. And that was it. Self-evident? It's a little business briefcase. I was restricted to collecting information that Israel was entitled to under the terms of the U.S.-Israel Intelligence Exchange Agreement. What happened was, and I have to explain this, there was a Soviet agent. They knew it somewhere in the intelligence community.
A mole.
A mole. And that person was Aldrich Ames. He worked for the 5th Directorate of the KGB, counterintelligence CIA, devastatingly effective. And when I was caught, he was ordered by the 5th Directorate to arrange things where I would be blamed for everything he did. So how did this work?
To explain why so many
The
American
agents
sources
were disappearing. There was a Soviet agent here in Israel who was compromised. And so the story that he told was the information that I provided Israel was obtained by this guy, passed on. And agents at the time said, that's not possible, because I didn't have a certain type of clearance for information that would have compromised the Soviet agents, the CIA agents. But nobody was listening because they wanted an answer. So here I am. And for years after my arrest, the agents kept dying. The entire CIA collection network and MI6 was wiped out by Ames. The day of my sentence, Ames visited the judge, which was illegal. And he explained to the judge how General Igor Tereshchikov, AKA Tricycle, that was his code name, was fed feet first into a furnace in the basement of the Lubyanka in Moscow in front of his family. So the judge and Ames said, this is the guy that did it. So a prosecutor...
Did you know James in
Did
person?
I know? No. So a prosecutor later came and asked me, who was trying to help me, do you remember a moment when the judge asked you if you had any remorse for all the people you killed? And I said, yes, I remember. And he said, where was your head? What did you say? And I said, yes, Your Honor, I have remorse that there wasn't one more. He said, okay, where was your head? I said, my head was in Tunis. They just talked about the raid that I participated in, that I facilitated, and we were supposed to kill Arafat. And somebody talked here in Israel, and who wanted to save him. He said, well, the judge's head was in the basement of the Lubyanka, and you just told him to his face that you just wished one more Tereshchikov, one more CIA agent. I said, I had nothing to do with that. He said, we later found out. I said, so why didn't you let me go? He said, because that faction in Washington wanted Israel to be wanted to be known that it was Israel who killed all those agents. I said, so they covered up for Ames for over 10 years and he continued to kill for 10 years? He said, yeah, it was more important to blacken Israel's name. He said, weren't you surprised by how many security officers were in court when you were sentenced? I said, I couldn't believe it. How many there were? He said, do you know why? No. He said, there were many agents from the CIA, the operations directorate, who had volunteered to come in and kill you in court. Okay, I understand how serious this was. When Ames was caught, Senator DeConcini, the head of the Senate Intelligence Committee, interviewed him, and he told the whole story about me. So DeConcini wrote a letter to Clinton, President Clinton, saying, you got the wrong guy, let him go. And Clinton's letter response was the following: we know, but Pollard has become too important as a bargaining chip with Israel. That's in black and white. Okay. That was one problem I had. The other problem, which may actually have been worse, was the fact that I played a role in Iran-Contra, which was insane. Here I am, and Rafi comes and says to me, you need to open up bank accounts. This is the story of the bank accounts. It was not a private bank account I had. I was given money. I was told to go to Zurich, to a bank, and open up accounts for Americans, which I did. And at one point, I was asked by Rafi to do an assessment, an analysis of air defense equipment that could be purchased on the international market for the defense of Karg Island that was being hit by the Iraqi Air Force. I had just bought a new tape for my typewriter. Remember, this is before computers. And I was so preoccupied at the time and distracted, I forgot to destroy the tape. So when it was obtained by the FBI, they of course translated it, converted it, and suddenly certain people understood that I knew about an illegal operation that was being run out of the White House. Now, after I was sentenced, I was taken across the street to the tax court. I had never even heard of it before. And there are 3 judges. I'm sitting there without a lawyer. And the chief judge looks at me and says, you're in a lot of trouble. I said, I know, I just got a life sentence with no parole across the street. He says, no, you have a bigger problem with the tax authorities. What? He said, we know about the Swiss bank accounts. He said, we have the numbers. We want the names. And I said, I don't recollect. And they couldn't understand why I wouldn't tell them the names. Things would have gone much better for me. And the judge said, look, I know, the chief judge said, I know you know who they are. What is your problem? He said, we can work a deal with the government to get you out. And I said, these men are patriots. This money was not for their personal use. You know that. This is operational. He said it was an illegal operation. I said, that's for you to handle. As far as I'm concerned, these men are patriots. He said, well, we have a document. He said, we understand that you couldn't take any money out. He said, if you don't tell us who the names are, the money is yours. I said, but you said you have a document that says I can't take it out. He said, we make the law here. So he said, last chance. I said, I don't remember. He said, okay, for the next 5 minutes, you're an extremely rich man because all this money that's in there is yours. So I thought for a moment quickly and I said, can I give this money to my mother and father or to my brother and sister? Could I do that since it's mine? No, Mr. Pollard, you can't do that. So this whole story was twisted and warped into a secret bank account for me. I mean, the facts show that I could not access this account. The facts show that I opened these accounts up on a certain day for a number of people, unnamed. The facts are all there, but it was more convenient for the prosecution to paint me into a mercenary. And the judge himself said, you know, when this issue came up at my sentencing, he said, I have two choices. I can either sentence you as a mercenary and give you 5 years and that's it, or I can sentence you as an agent who swore allegiance to another country, an ideologue. And he said at the end, I'm going to sentence you as that to life without parole. And nobody understood why at that moment I thanked the judge. People thought I had gone mishugath. People thought I had gone crazy. Who thanks a judge for giving them a life sentence with no parole? But it was very important for me to go down described accurately for who and what I was.
To continue this subject about the money, you were paid well by Israel for what you were doing? Because in
No.
in some allegations online, people saying about your lavish trip to France with your fiancé Anne Pollard, buying in expensive shops.
No.
You know, what could you comment on that?
At one point when I became a professional Israeli agent, I received a salary. I had no choice in the matter. I paid taxes. It's part of the intelligence work where you have even a CIA agent or a KGB agent or an MI6 agent who has a cover career, and he's paid. But he also receives his professional payment from the agency he works for. That was the same with me. And the salary that I got at the time, taxed salary, was the same as any agent, Israeli agent at the time.
So it's not a huge money.
No, it was not. And people tend to forget, again, that we were a two-income family. My wife worked, I worked, and we drove an old car, beat up old car. I liked it. It was a Mustang, so I happened to like Mustangs. So it was an old car. We lived in a nice part of Washington, but it wasn't the rich part of Washington. There were bureaucrats lived there. Businessmen worked there, business people worked there, academics lived there. It was right downtown. It was very convenient.
So I said it's not a lavish lifestyle, it's
No.
an ordinary
No, and the judge,
middle class.
the judge, in fact, stopped the government from making that charge. This was, again, they weren't there, so they don't understand what happened when they were explaining, you know, all of the restaurants that we went to and everything else. The judge said, yes, I've received letters from the managers of the restaurants saying they hardly ate anything that was a problem. You know, they came at a certain time where it was a discount, you know. We didn't have that kind of money. I mean, we're paying a mortgage on a house. It was a lot of money that we paid for that. It was important for the government to make me out to be a mercenary, because in the absence of any demonstrable harm to the United States, they had to come up with something to paint me as a monster. And by doing that, there was a side benefit. You blacken the reputation of the agent, you blacken his cause. So there were a lot of things going on at the time, most of which the judge rejected.
I want to ask you another question, which I was going again all over UKs and how you were operated in Washington, at least according to what was published everywhere. And it seems like a kind of homemade espionage. I mean, it was not a Mossad, no special equipment when you have these micro cameras to make photos of the documents. You were just taking the documents, bringing them home to the scientific attaché in Israel embassy, copying them, bringing them back to work. I have a few questions with the regard for that. First one, was that the right thing to operate, and maybe that's caused at the end to the failure of the operation? And second, why no one in the agency where you work for could understand what's going on, that you're taking out the documents?
As far as the Israelis were concerned, they showed no concern for my security at all. And the requirements, as the requirements became more and more and more important and detailed, that was the career I had. I wasn't doing any, or it seemed like I wasn't doing anything else. You have to understand that I was responsible for a lot of professional things at the time in my job. And I had to go to various libraries and organizations to collect information. So I had a good cover story, and I just collected a little bit more than what I should have. But I always had an explanation for why I had things. There was a lot of embarrassment in Washington when I was caught, and they realized that somebody without high-level training and without any support at all was able to do what I did. There was one instance where I was told to go to a certain agency, and I said, I can't walk in there. I mean, they'll arrest me if I walk in there. And they said, no, we need this information. This is critical. And they explained why. So I put my gun on, I had my badge, and I walked in. And I just said, I'm here to investigate a case of espionage. Oh, just go. And I knocked on somebody's door, and they opened it, looking at me. And I showed them my badge. The eyes open up. I said, I'm investigating a case of espionage. It's not me. I'm loyal. I said, I know you are, but I have to look at your files. I said, open up all your file cabinets. Yes, sir. They opened up all the file cabinets. And I said, bring Xerox paper in. And he brought me Xerox paper. I said, bring me a cup of coffee. I said, now leave. I locked the door. And I got what was needed. And I walked right out the front door, showing them my badge, right out the front door. I nearly threw up, but I got it. Was it important? For us, it was. For the Americans, they understood that information was information that was supposed to be given to Israel. And the agency that I took it from didn't want to go forward with talking about it because it would be embarrassing. Like, why didn't you give it to Israel anyway? You were supposed to. So they didn't say anything. So you have to understand that I was completely alone. I had no help. I had no support. There was nobody helping me. There was no Mr. X.
Yeah, that's where the allegations, they put a pressure on you to get you disclose some mystical
Correct.
additional high-ranking agent
Right.
who probably directed
They needed it professionally to cover their own stupidity and unprofessionalism, because here I am walking in, taking what I needed and just walking out the front door. It's amazing what a badge can do. I was a special agent, an anti-terrorist special agent. And it's, for people in Washington, it's very scary because the power that we had was extraordinary. So that's how it worked. If it hadn't been for this CIA spy in the Knesset, I would have been okay.
That's what I want to talk the next. How you were disclosed. According again to what's going online, some publications, people say that some co-worker just saw you going out with top secret file
Afterwards.
out of the door of the
Afterwards.
of the office.
Okay. You have to understand that after I was caught, there was a need on the part of my business, my operation, my employer, to excuse what happened. So nobody saw me taking anything out. That's just the fact. There were, for example, if somebody had seen me taking anything out after work, especially, there would have been a report made. There were no reports made. So they had to get people to come forward and say, oh, yes, we saw him do this, or oh, yes, we were on it. And they weren't on it.
So you think that someone in Israel actually disclosed you to the Americans? Because your documents probably were quite widespread in Israel.
Rafi Eitan, I was told, used those documents to embarrass the Mossad during cabinet meetings. Look what I did. You know, he was angry he wasn't selected as the head of Mossad. So he used this, and the Mossad people were saying, my God, you got an agent in American intelligence? He said, yeah. I mean, and my name was mentioned. He used my name, my real name, not my code name, my real name. When I was arrested, the Mossad did everything they could to bury me. I was brutally interrogated. I'm 100% disabled right now. I was brutally interrogated. And I later found out when I came home, that the Mossad knew what was happening to me, and they said it was okay. They wanted me dead. And it wasn't, I embarrassed them, Rafi embarrassed them. It was two agencies, the Mossad and Lakam, that were in conflict. And
Lakam is, in English, it's a scientific bureau. But
correct.
In fact, it was doing scientific intelligence.
In the Ministry of Defense.
Yeah.
And Rafi...
Rafi was a legend.
Yes, he was a legend.
What was your impression of him? Because I think you had meetings in Paris, in Israel.
Mr. Magoo. That's what he looked like, Nebuch. What I didn't realize was that he had a habit of abandoning agents. Didn't care. A lot of speculation has been made about who it was that ordered my expulsion from the embassy after I'd been told to come. And there is some feeling here in Israel now that whoever actually ordered my expulsion was a Soviet agent. It was very important that I be caught to cover for Aldrich Ames. The only country that benefited by my arrest was the Soviet Union, because it saved their agent for another 10 years. God only knows what kind of damage he did in that period of time. So there were other moments, for example, with the Tunis raid, where somebody from Israel tipped him off because he varied his routine that day. For months, he did the same thing every day, Dafka, except that day. He stood there and watched our jets pass overhead and blow up his headquarters. He should have been inside that headquarters. But Dafka, on that day, he varies his routine. Lama. Why? Somebody talked here. So it was the same thing since coming home.
But before that, you told that there was not a clear escape plan ready in place.
There was nothing.
Nothing. No preparations, and then you were directed to go to the Israel embassy.
Correct.
Okay, so and you go inside the embassy, and you're turned around by the
What happened was
FBI is behind you, right? You're
I
followed by FBI.
realized when I saw the camera over my desk, it was right at the same time, and the alarm bells went off. I should have run. And apparently I could have escaped at that point. But the problem was I hadn't obtained the information I came home for. The information that Rafi said would mean war or peace on the Golan. And it was only the next day that I got the answer. It was too late because I was arrested that night. So when I was told to come to the embassy, I argued, this is insane. They think I'm a Pakistani agent. Come to the embassy, those are your orders. Click. When I came to the embassy, they were all waiting at the Pakistani embassy. There was only one FBI car behind me and a helicopter, and that was it. And I suddenly turned into the embassy. The gate was open, and the minute I came in, it was closed. So I'm there. And the chief of security came out, and he said, Jerusalem says you have to leave and come in the front door. And I'm looking up there are hundreds of them. So I understood what was going to happen to me. So I said to him, take my wife in and just shoot me. Just say you thought I was a terrorist. And that's when everybody moved away from me. And he said, I can't do that. My orders are to have you leave the embassy. So as I was getting into the car, he held the door and he said, what is your last report? And I told him. It was a direction that this equipment was going clearly not to Syria. It was going to Libya. And he said, okay, Hatzlacha.
So you gave information before you're actually going out, and you
Correct.
knew you would be arrested immediately.
Correct.
I have a strange question, I must say. I was looking on the photographs just after you have been arrested exiting the Israel embassy. And I see many photos of spies arrested in different places. And you are sitting very calm in the car. You know, there's a famous photo, and you're sitting very calm and even, I can say, peaceful and smiling. Why? You were so confident, brave.
I was proud of what I had done because I had kept faith with Israel. And I had done what my uncle always told me to do, which was sacrifice your life if you have to save the Jewish people, in whatever way that is. So I was calm.
So you felt like martyr, you know.
You know, I felt that I had done what I was supposed to have done as a Jew.
So you had a peace inside you.
I've always had a peace inside me. I disappeared for about 6 weeks. And my lawyers were trying to find me. My family was trying to find me. I had been renditioned. That's the fancy name for it. I don't know where I was. Naked, bag over my head. Every joint was broken. I was raped for 6 weeks. I have a plate in my head. They wanted me to tell them, of course, who my team was. I said no. But they also wanted me to sign a document with the names of every major American Jewish leader on it. Put a check mark to implicate them in my operation. I knew what that was. That was a decapitation of the American Jewish establishment, the pro-Israel establishment. I was raised never to be moser another Jew, ever. Maybe in a bed din, but not in a goyish court. And so, a very famous rabbi here who knew about it, because I had a high court case here. When I was in prison, I had a high court case because the government did nothing to have helped me at the time. And this rabbi asked me, what were you praying for during the interrogation? And I said, either that Hashem would kill me, or let them kill me, or he'd keep my mouth shut. And I said, thank God, Baruch Hashem, I kept my mouth shut. Many, many years later, I'm at a reception here with a friend of mine who told me, we have a surprise for you tonight. And I looked around, and all of the big shots, the leading figures in Israeli media were there. And I said, I don't like surprises. He said, no. And so who walks in? Abe Foxman, the former head of the Anti-Defamation League. For over 20 years, he was one of my most bitter enemies, arguing that I should stay in prison, that I'd done horrible damage, and And I never knew why he changed after 20 years, calling for my immediate release, that my case was one of anti-Semitism, that I should be repatriated to Israel. What happened, I never knew. So he comes in and he tells the story to all these people that one day a certain senator, Jewish, called him down to Washington. They went for a walk on the mall, and the senator told him that his name was on the top of the list that I was protecting and what they had done to me. He told this story to everybody, and he asked for mechila.
I have a difficult question for you. You see yourself as a part of Israel as a family, and by the Israel intelligence community or intelligence establishment, in fact, betrayed you.
Yes.
Very bluntly, I can say that.
Correct.
They struck a deal with the United States.
Correct.
And in this deal, they just said, we will sacrifice Pollard. We will save our ass from the prosecution by the
Correct.
United States. And they disclosed all documents, everything, so you actually were incriminated.
Can I tell you that moment? I hadn't said anything at that point. I had already been interrogated. So they did the worst they could up until that point. And Baruch Hashem, thank God I survived. And the U.S. attorney comes in and he looks at me, the prosecutor, triumphantly with a box. And he said, your brothers gave you up. What do you mean? He put the box down. I said, open the box up. Oh, I'm not going to open that up with my hand? I don't think so. He opened it up. And he showed me documents that had been returned. He said, you owe them nothing. He said, so I want to know names. I want to know this. I said, no. He said, we can go for the death penalty. Avadati. Oh, it's no problem. Go ahead, do what you want. So as he left, I thought for a second, and I said, excuse me. He turned around and looked at me. I said, do you think you got everything? And the smile left his face. I said, I'll be going back to the jail right now. They have a wonderful lunch of peanut butter and jelly. We later got the notes of the cabinet meeting that led to those documents being released. It was declassified. Rehavim Ze'evi, may his blood be avenged, was the one that got it. It was Shimon Peres. And they were arguing with him. Did you get the agent back? No, the Americans, Peres said, won't use this information against him. That was the only hard evidence they had to use against me. But nobody told me they couldn't. So it was Arik Sharon, according to the document. that said to Perez, "You have killed the agent." When we found out about this, we asked everybody we knew, was there any substance to this? Because we could get back into court maybe. And the answer was George Shultz, the US Secretary of State at the time, said absolutely nothing of the sort. He said, "I talked to Perez routinely." And Perez gave the information back and said, that's it. You do what you want with it. So this shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. So Perez lied. That was his routine. He was.
For me, what was shocking, not that they made an agreement with the United States. I can understand that Israel depends on American aid.
Can I tell you, wait, to underline what you just said, I signed a plea agreement that stated that I was a bona fide Israeli agent working on an approved operation for the state of Israel. And I signed that because I'm protected. I walked into court to take my plea that I'm guilty, and suddenly there's a new plea agreement. The one that I signed, it was crossed out with red and blue ink. The blue ink was Avram Sofer, the chief legal officer of the State Department. The red ink was Israel. I don't know the initials. Everywhere it said I was a bona fide Israeli agent, it was changed to renegade, mercenary, walk-in, whatever. And that it was an unapproved operation on the part of the government. And I looked at my lawyers and I said, "This is a lie. What are you doing to me?" He said, "Look at your wife. If you don't sign this, you're signing her death sentence," because they were denying her medical attention at the time. So I said to him, "I'm an orphan. They're going to do what they want." He said, "Sign or you're killing her." So I stood before the judge and he said, "Are you doing this, signing this of your own free will?" And I said, "No, they're threatening my wife." It should come as no surprise that I subsequently discovered the fact that the red ink was from the Mossad, which also explains why I have been under the protection of the Shabak since coming home. When I asked why, since I'm an intelligence agent, they said the Mossad would rather have you dead, and we can't trust them. So I have to live with that also.
What was, I think, very annoying about the agreement between the Israel and America, which in general can be understood as Israel is heavily dependent on American help, aid, and it's clear. But what was in the agreement was not only the interest of the state. The major part was the immunity for the people participating
Correct.
in your operation, officers who were involved. So they all took care of themselves.
Correct.
And America said, if you provide all the information, we would not prosecute you. Besides one person, it actually is Jonathan Pollard.
Well, Colonel Sella. The story that came out.
Because he was not disclosed at the time, I think.
Well,
when the agreement was struck.
When I was polygraphed and his name was mentioned, I took the polygraph off. And the FBI, the chief FBI polygrapher said, "It's okay, we know everything about him." And I said, "Well, not for me, you don't." He said, "No, but we know everything." He was ordered to lie by the government, the Israeli government. He didn't want to. He wanted to tell the truth, but they forced him. And that's why he was indicted. Len Garment was his lawyer. Len Garment was the former counsel to President Nixon. He's a very, very important lawyer. And he wrote a book called Crazy Rhythm. And he described, one chapter is about General now, Sella. And it was clear that the Israeli political establishment wanted to kosher him in order to kosher themselves. So he was forced to hand in a lie. That's why he was indicted, the only other one. And towards the end of my stay in New York, I was part of the effort to get a pardon for him. They sacrificed him also. On October 7th, I realized something. Up until that point, I thought I was the exception to the rule. I grew up with the notion we never leave a man behind. And I took some comfort from that I was the exception, okay. But on October 7th, what I suddenly realized was that the Israeli political establishment, the intelligence community, and the army had abandoned all of us. And that's the origin of my decision to go political. I don't want that ever to happen again. I personally know what it's like to be abandoned. I personally know what it's like to be buried 150 meters underground in a 3 square meter cell. I know what it's like to be interrogated, raped, beaten, broken. I don't want what happened on October 7th ever to happen again. But unfortunately, so long as we have the same people who are responsible for October 7th, anywhere near the government, in the army, whatever, in the intelligence community, it will happen again. Because they will do to the rest of us what they did to me.
Last question. The furious reaction of American establishment, Washington, White House, when your case was discovered. First of all, the insistence on you to be in jail for life sentence. And we know Casper Weinberger, the Secretary of Defense, described your case as one of the most worst ever possible espionage episodes whatsoever. And even Tenet, the head of the CIA, said to Clinton, he will resign if he will consider releasing him.
There's a story behind that. He later revealed, when he had retired, that he was asked to do that. Because Clinton needed, and this was at the Y River negotiations.
Excused not to release you.
Right.
To have an excuse.
Yeah. That Clinton needed an explanation for going back against an agreement with Bibi to release me. So Tenet later said that he denied ever having made that threat. And Tenet, to his credit, on record, in a publication, said that there was never any evidence that the information I had provided Israel had gotten into the hands of anybody else. Well, he knew that when I was, he knew that for 30 years, and he finally makes a statement at the end. You should understand that there was one effort made, 2 efforts actually, to get me out. Yitzhak Rabin arranged to get me out. At the signing ceremony of the Israel-Jordan peace agreement in Washington, people were coming down to see me about preparing me to come home. I said, what is going on? He said, President Clinton has agreed for his chaver, Yitzhak Rabin, may his blood be avenged, to release you. Okay, fine. And they said, you want to talk or not? I said, no, I'm not going to talk. The deal is done. Rabin was killed. And Peres asked for me to come home with. And Clinton said, no, that deal was with Rabin. I want you to release 100 security person. And Peres said, no, I can't do that. Buses are blowing up in Jerusalem right now. So that was one. The second one came when Esther came to prison to see me, and she said, Secretary of State Kerry offered a deal that in exchange for the release of some of the worst terrorists in Israel, that I would be released. but I could never go home. I would have to stay in Israel. So Esther, alayha shalom, said to me, before you give your answer, they're making you give the answer, yes or no. And you know, some people would say that that was unethical on the part of Bibi, to make a man like me that had no hope, no future, no light at the end of the tunnel, make a decision like this. But he knew what my answer would be. So Esther, alayha shalom, said, before you give your answer, know that if you decide to stay in prison, I will stay with you. If you decide to make this deal and live in the midbar, I will stay with you. So what's your answer? So I said, no. And she said, can you give me a slightly longer answer? I have to go home and talk to the cabinet about this. I said, hell no. And she said, you know, you're an educated man. You know, can you give me an educated answer? So I said, okay, there are three reasons why I have to say no. One, it's disrespectful to the victims. Two, it will bring horrible pain to the families because I know they want me home, but not at this cost. And thirdly, it will lower deterrence. So for those three reasons, I can't agree to this. And she said, well, those are very good, logical reasons, but they're not Jewish reasons. She was my morah. So I said, okay, what's the Jewish explanation? She said, you have only two ways to go home. Either as an old man, to kiss the ground when you come home, to thank God for your life, or to come home as a body, as a met, to be buried in Knesset Yisrael. Those are the only two. If you agree to this deal, you would be making the same mistake that the Meragalim made in the desert when they chose the Midbar over Eretz Yisrael. And we've been paying for that sin ever since. She said, that's why you say no. And I said, it's the Jewish answer? She said, yes. I said, then you can put my name on it.
Jonathan Pollard, thank you very much for revealing such a Hollywoodic story about espionage, Israel, Jewish people, love of Israel. And I hope you're now happy and pleased in Israel, being in Israel.
I am.
Welcome home.
Thank you.